there's people watching, right? And we've already like messed up at the beginning. And then it like cuts and it's just me, the cinematographer, and Ellen being like, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God. And like cursing and being like, okay, we're live again in 30 seconds. Here we go.
When did you decide you were going to be not only the lead actress in Night Mother, but also a producer?
Oh man, that whole thing feels like a fever dream at times. I'll tell you the story of it. So it's 2020 and the film industry has shut down and died and we are all out of a job, right? Like all of a sudden everything was halted. We're at home. That's all. By July, I was like, as fun as this is, I'm dying inside because for me, since this is my calling, if I don't get to do it every day, I really do feel like I'm atrophying. So I was like, well, okay, I can at the very least work on something. I can become better as an artist and work on my craft. So I reached out to a friend of mine, a really dear friend from my opera days, Ellen McLean, who super internationally famous voice actor. She was GLaDOS in Portal and Portal 2 and voices like half the characters in Dota 2. She's voiced an incredible body of work and is an amazing woman. And also was an opera singer. So she was my boss for like a small local opera gig in Seattle. But I always admired her as an artist and reached out to her. I was like, hey, let's chat on Zoom sometime. So we're chatting and catching up. And I was like, do you want to just kick around a play? Like, I would love to just kind of work on character and maybe look at this in a different way so that when this time is up, I'm not just like, well, I was sad, like something came out of it. So she said, sure, yeah, I love that. That's a great idea. Let's do it. Let me think on that. And the next time we met, she was like, hey, I found this play. It's perfect. It's for 2 women. It's called Night Mother. And I was like, whoa, because Night Mother was a play that was there for me during a really hard bout of my own depression. And there was this like lightning moment that like kicked off where I was like, if we're going to do this, then we're going to actually do it. We're going to really do a production. And all of a sudden, all these things that I didn't realize I was paying attention to kicked off, and I knew sort of how I wanted to do the production. Side note, people had been trying to ask me to be a producer for many years prior to this. They could see that I probably would be really good at it. And every time it's just, no, I'm not interested in it. My concern was, oh God, it's gonna be the worst part of like a middle school group project. And I really had no interest. I was like, creatively, I'm not sure that's something I wanna do. And I remember like people being like, produce your own content. But I was seeing a lot of actors do like vanity content where it's like, I want to be in a Western because I want to be in a Western. And I'm like, great, your short had no substance and I'm very bored. Thank you for that. Which sometimes I love vanity content. Like it's fun to consume, it's fun to act in, but producing? No, not so much. So I was like, whatever. If I produce, like the right thing will come to me and I'll know. And this was that moment where I was like, well, I'm going to produce something apparently. So we began working on it. And how I wanted to do it began to flesh out of like, okay, the film rights were already sold. We clearly can't do a standard movie of Night Mother because that already exists and I think won an Oscar, so we can't touch that. I don't want to do a play. I don't want to rent out a theater and do it like that. I want to do something that's filmic. So I started kicking around this idea of a new type of filmmaking. And I have a friend and mentor in Bernie Sue. He has a show on Twitch called Artificial, speaking of really great sci-fi that I cannot recommend enough. And Bernie is just this like really fascinating cutting edge guy, right? Like he won the first Emmy for a YouTube series, and then he won an Emmy for his Twitch series, and now he's doing a TikTok series. And so he's always like kind of like pushing the envelope with new innovative ways of doing filmmaking. But like the way he did his series was very much about audience input. And so I saw that and was like, what if we put that on its head? And I used a platform that was all about audience integration, but the audience doesn't get to influence the story. So it really is kind of like a mix of both. So I'm calling it hybrid filmmaking because it really is the best of live theater, audience integration platform, and traditional cinematic filming. It was this weird, crazy beast that was really fun to play with in terms of talking to Twitch and being like, I have 2 huge video game stars that I'm working with. You love having those on your platform. This is how to get those on your platform. So you are going to do XYZ for us, to which they said, yes, of course. We ended up, my dear friend Sarah, who was my co-producer on the production, came up with this brilliant idea to work with a bunch of mental health focused nonprofits so that we could create a curated list of offerings for our audience of like, hey, if you went into crisis from the film, here are things you can get that are either free or at a discounted rate so that you can get care right now. Like really kind of walking the walk, right? Because the cool thing about audience integration with your film is that you can actually care for your audience in real time. And it doesn't even have to be you doing it, right? I was playing one of the lead roles. I was not able to be like, don't feel sad, like, let's talk about it. I was like in the zone, fully in the script. So we had to get really innovative with what we did. We worked with this one organization called Take This. And specifically, they're a nonprofit about mental health in the gaming community, but they're therefore deeply familiar with Twitch. So they came on and they gave us live chat moderators as well as bots so that the bots and the live chat folks could be like, let's make sure we're staying on topic, but also identify if an audience member went into crisis, because then they could pull them out into a cool down room where they could then sit with a licensed mental health counselor and be like, how are you? Can you do something to ground yourself right now? So that we could actually take care of our audience. Because so much of film is like triggering. And then you're like, I'm a raw wound. I guess I'm going to go home. And as a creative, that's not something I feel particularly great about. Like, I don't want to just upset everyone. I want it to be like, okay, well, here's where we started. And here's the movement that follows. I wanted to create a community. I wanted to create a platform. I wanted this to be more than a one and done experience. I wanted it to be that we would keep talking about it. Here we are over a year later talking about it, right? So it took on a life of its own, and it was everything that I loved about collaboration. Like everyone who came on board the project brought their own special sauce that made it so much better than anything I could have imagined on my own. And we really did become an international movement. I mean, we did better than I could have ever possibly dreamed. And really, for me, I knew I wanted to make something because it was 2020. And I was like, oh my God, there's millions and millions of people out there who've never felt depression or anxiety or PTSD. And they're learning right now, and they're trapped at home alone. What can I do to reach them? And that was what Night Mother was a piece, a swan song of like, let's not be fluffy about suicide. Let's actually shine a light at that shadow, and let's talk about it without pulling any punches. And then once we've made it safe to talk about that, here are ways that you can get care, or at the very least find support should you want it.
Is Night Mother a feature film?
It is a feature film. Mm-hmm. It is 64 minutes long, so it kind of barely qualifies as a feature. But yes, it is. It is. We cut it significantly because the play itself, I think, is like a 2-hour ordeal. But since we had moved it to an online platform, it just didn't make sense to make people sit there for 2 hours. I didn't want to bring up like the painful memories of a too long Zoom meeting that we all have now been through over the past couple of years of like, God, why won't it end? So Ellen is just a masterful dramaturg, and she just lived with that script and just kept cutting it until it was the bare bones of what beats in the story needed to be there so that the story made sense from start to finish. Again, it's that whole keeping it general, but also very specific so that someone coming in and watching the story can relate to it.
And the two of you are the only ones on screen?
Mm-hmm. Well, occasionally there's flashback sequences of other characters, but in terms of people actively speaking, it was just Ellen and I. And we did the whole thing so it was crazy because we did this on September 21st or 24th of 2021. But we did it, the whole thing start to finish live, where we performed it start to finish live in front of a studio audience. It was recorded and basically edited because our cinematographer was like this man behind the curtain dropping in these flashbacks where he thought it made sense, almost like jazz music. So there was like this improvisatory character almost of the flashbacks that was fun because Ellen and we were on a different platform that was being run through into the Twitch feed. So functionally, it felt like a Zoom call. We didn't see the audience. We didn't see any of that. It was just me talking to her, which meant there was no pressure, really. We just had to exist and live in the script and live in that moment. with each other and hold space with each other for 64 minutes.
How did you feel about saying yes to it? I know you said that if you were going to do it, there was no stopping you, but then were there times where it did feel
Yes.
like it was triggering you?
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, filmmaking and starting as a filmmaker is like, you are going to have a lot of people come up and promise you the moon and then not want to help you. Because again, a lot of people subscribe to a really sad version of capitalism of, I have no interest in actually following through and helping you with you and your project. And who cares if it never happens? Thank goodness I picked something that was important to me, because when the going got tough, if it wasn't, I probably would have dropped the project. Producing is really, really tough in that you are going to have to deal with a lot of BS and a lot of people who it seems like exist just to make your life hard. There's a lot of moving parts, and a lot of gatekeeping, I think. A lot of folks in our industry and beyond who aren't seeing the big picture necessarily that I had to work through, as it were. And so, yeah, it can be really tough. It can be really, really hard. There were more than a few times where I was like, okay, I need to go vent to someone because I cannot throw the towel in. I have to tell this story. I have to finish this project and see it through. And I'm so glad that I did.
So it wanted to fall apart on you many times.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, there were a lot of times that the plug wanted to be pulled, and every time it was like, even if I am holding this together myself. Someone told me that like the act of a film being made is an actual miracle every single time, because there's so many ways that it could just never be made. And it felt that way, certainly. There were times where it was like, I have to brute force my way into keeping this thing going, which is exhausting. Not something that I always want to be doing, certainly, but for the right project, yeah, something I would do again and again, gladly.
Did you perform this feature film live?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we did. We actually had a false start in it because something was like janky about the audio on Ellen's end. I want to say that like her AirPods weren't working. It was so funny. So we had a false start, totally didn't work at all. And so like there's people watching, right? And we've already like messed up at the beginning. And then it like cuts and it's just me, the cinematographer, and Ellen being like, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God. And like cursing and being like, okay, we're live again in 30 seconds. Here we go. Doesn't matter. Keep going. Yeah, it was live. Oh, was it live? But I mean, God, Ellen and I poured ourselves into that. It was exhausting. We sat with those characters for 14 months. And in the 2 months prior to actually doing it live, we would rehearse for a minimum of 3 hours a day. Usually longer. And then that was just group rehearsing that was separate from individual rehearsing before and after that. So from like a therapeutic standpoint, by the end of this, I was like, I am so sick of suicide and I never want to talk about it again. Very healing for someone who had been struggling with that, right? But putting in all that work and all that sweat equity made it so that we really could just trust each other, and we could trust that we had put in the work. We could just be present with each other. And then, of course, like I said, the software was run in through this platform called OBS, where you're not even like, Trevor, our cinematographer, was dealing with is this matching up? Let me drop in some footage. What's going on in the chat? Sarah was manning the chat, and we had some other celebrity influencers coming and manning the chat as well. So Ellen and I could just be present and do the show, start to finish, act by act, scene by scene, go through this journey of this mother and daughter together, trying to connect with two very different worldviews, trying to find each other, find their way back to each other. And of course, the tragedy is that they do find their way back to each other, but by then it's too late.
Where else have you seen a film live before? Done in real time, almost like a play, but on Zoom.
I've never seen it before. I never have in my life. There's films like Searching, where that one isn't live, but it's like it takes place on a computer desktop, right? Fabulous film if you haven't seen it. Really can't recommend it enough. But in terms of seeing a film live, no, I'd never seen it before. like I said, artificial, Bernie Sue's show, yes, that was live. Or he showed me this screamingly funny telenovela that's on Twitch, where it's like the actors will perform a scene and it's live and it's kind of like sitcom, right? Where they're doing a live multicam taping. And then all of a sudden there's a scene break and the audience gets to vote one of 3 choices for how the story progresses. And then the actors are like, oh, we're doing scene C. Okay, here we go. And they just have to memorize 3 times the amount of script based off of what audiences could potentially choose. I've seen that, but nothing like this. Not like a heavy, dramatic film that was live. So in retrospect, it's fun to watch. You know, are there things I would change? Yeah, it was my first feature that I produced. But I'm also immensely proud of the work my entire team put into that thing, because we were all pioneering and figuring it out together. We were all making it up as we go along, consulting with people, sitting with ourselves and figuring out what the best choice would be for the story.
What would you change? What are some of the things?
You know, we made the choice to film on film because we wanted to give the flashback sequences, not for the live taping, but for the flashback sequences specifically, we filmed on 16 millimeter. And we made that choice to give it like a grainy, sort of textured, lost in my memories type of look, right? Like a flashback look. But the gear, we didn't have time to really test out and get developed and see if we needed to make any camera adjustments. And so, frankly, all of that footage is pretty blurry, which I think lends to the storytelling in that it's like murky and you don't know what's happening. But I would have liked to take more time to like really do that properly, you know, maybe get second camera in there so that we could get some digital shots for safety and really flesh out how we wanted those dropped-in scenes to be. I would have liked to take more time with that. I definitely would have changed that. And I would have experimented with like, can we have multiple camera angles, medium wide close up for the sort of static shots of Ellen and I speaking with each other so that it felt more filmic. You know, we ended up making an artistic choice of having both of us side by side the entire time because personally I feel that half of the story is in the reactions the other person has. And so if we had edited it like a film, like she said, he said, she said, she said, she said, she said, you were going to miss half the story. Which is really how are these people reacting to the words that they hear. So it is really unconventional. You know, it's not a film for everybody for sure. And definitely on the festival circuit, people were like, no, I don't want this film, which is fine. It's not meant to be for everybody. That's okay. It reached the people it needed to reach, you know?
So aside from having it premiere on Twitch, then you wanted to take it to
we
festivals?
took it on the festival circuit and we did really well. I'm really happy with the festival turnout. We won a Webby Award. We even had a small presence at Cannes this year, so I'm beyond thrilled with how that film went. I mean, full disclosure, the budget for our film was $5,000. So it was a non-budget. It was like a below zero budget. But to be able to have the tracking that we got, it was also a charitable production because I wanted to be really specific about like, this is going to go to mental health organizations because that is what we were all about with what we're doing. But I tracked how much we would have made if we had actually tried to make it a commercially viable thing, and it was alarmingly successful.
Where can someone see Night Mother now?
You can see it on our Twitch channel, which is called Night Mother on Twitch. You'll if you search for that, it'll come right up. Alternatively, it's the link in my Instagram bio, so you really can't miss it there, which is always fun to tell people who are like, where do I see it? And I'm like, it's right there if you just click it. Yeah, I try to keep it easily accessible.
What advice do you have for another producer who wants to be part of a live film?
What advice do I have? I guess the biggest one is you are taking on the challenges of both live theater and film, and be prepared for that. It is going to be twice the amount of work that you thought it was. However, it's also has the ability to let you tell a story on a super budget, right? Like my budget was $5,000. It was something where we could all come together, do the story, tell it right, and money was not an issue, which I think is so often a challenge with indie filmmaking. It also was like we have built-in distribution, so I don't have to worry about going to the markets and playing the distribution game. I think a big problem with film and other arts is the high barriers to entry of cost. And so finding ways to let people authentically tell stories that matter to them, that they want to be told, that also get to like kind of debut who they are as an artist in a lot of ways. We have to find ways that are cost effective, ways where people don't necessarily have a budget of $1 million, but their story has merit, and they should also be allowed to make money off of their story should they choose. I would just say it's a lot of work, but there are a lot of potential rewards to doing it. And I think if you pick a story that means something to you, that you believe is going to mean something to others, then you cannot fail.
How important was it to have this audience interaction?
Really important to me. I did not want to leave my audience feeling unheard and uncared for. We actually had a whole post-show panel after the film, specifically because, and again, Sarah's brilliant idea, because I wanted it to be a ramp up. I didn't want people, look, quite transparently, the play in the film ends with the daughter taking her own life. It ends with a suicide. So I was like, do I want to have my audience leave that experience completely shattered? Or do we want to have a panel talking about resources, talking about, I'm a celebrity and I feel sad sometimes too, talking about ways politically you can lobby your senators to advocate for more equitable mental health care across this country, right? I wanted to make it a platform so that people could talk about the film afterwards with each other in the chat, right? Where people could feel like they were left with a positive, like, this is a community, I'm a part of it, I'm gonna take care of myself, and maybe I'll be brave enough to tell my story too. That's how I wanted people to leave it, and why we did the post-show panel.